This actually happened to me. It's a true story, a real incident from my life that I still think about almost every day. The acrid smell of burning paper still catches in my throat sometimes, even now, years later. It was a crisp autumn evening in our cramped suburban kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona. The kind of night where the desert chill was just starting to creep in, and the sky outside was painted in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. I remember the exact moment etched into my memory like a scar, the flickering orange glow illuminating his smug, satisfied face as the last corner of the heavy cream-colored envelope, emblazoned with the crimson shield of Harvard University, curled into ash and then disintegrated. "Looks like you won't be needing this, princess," Mark drawled, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, the smoke alarm blissfully silent, perhaps as shocked as I was. My mother stood beside him, her face a mask of passive compliance, her eyes fixed on the burning embers in the ceramic sink, utterly silent. The betrayal wasn't just in the flames, but in the chilling complicity of her silence, a silence that screamed louder than any shout, sealing my fate in that moment. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Alara Vance, and for most of my life, I existed in the shadow of Mark Thorne, a man who, despite never sharing a drop of blood with me, became the architect of my deepest wounds. He entered our lives when I was 13, a charming, charismatic stranger who swept my recently widowed mother, Sarah, off her feet with promises of security and a new beginning. My father, a brilliant but struggling artist, had died unexpectedly of a heart attack 2 years prior, leaving my mother adrift and burdened with his debts. Mark, a mid-level manager at a local real estate firm in Scottsdale, seemed like a savior. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and always knew the right thing to say, at least to my mother. To me, he was a different beast, entirely. From the moment he moved into our modest 3-bedroom house in Glendale, the air shifted, thickening with an unspoken tension that only I seemed to feel. He had an uncanny knack for making me feel small, insignificant, and constantly in the way, subtly undermining every achievement, every dream I dared to voice. It started with small things, a dismissive chuckle when I showed him a perfect score on a math test, a sarcastic comment about my nose always being in a book when I was studying late. He'd hog the television, blast his classic rock, and complain if I made any noise, even if I was just trying to do my homework. My mother, desperate to maintain the peace and cling to her newfound stability, rarely intervened. Her silence became a constant refrain, a low hum of disappointment that resonated more deeply than any of Mark's barbs. She'd offer weak excuses. "He's just tired, honey," or "He doesn't mean anything by it, Alara." But I knew he did. I felt it in the cold glint of his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, in the deliberate way he would brush past me, never quite making eye contact. My father had instilled in me a fierce love for learning, a belief that education was the ultimate freedom. He would take me to the Burton Bar Central Library in downtown Phoenix every weekend, letting me roam the stacks, devouring books on everything from astrophysics to ancient history. He'd talk about Harvard, not as some unattainable dream, but as a beacon, a place where minds like mine could truly flourish. After he died, that dream became a sacred vow, a way to honor his memory and escape the stifling reality of my home life. I poured myself into my studies, late nights fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable resolve. I aced AP classes at Ironwood High, joined the debate team, volunteered at St. Joseph's Hospital, and spent my summers interning at a small biotech lab at ASU. Harvard wasn't just a dream. It was my escape route, my Declaration of Independence. I filled out the application in secret, meticulously crafting essays late into the night, hiding them from Mark's prying eyes. My guidance counselor, Ms. Jenkins, a kind woman who saw the potential others overlooked, was my confidant and champion. She helped me with financial aid forms, wrote glowing recommendations, and cheered me on with an enthusiasm my own mother couldn't muster. The wait was agonizing, each day a slow torture of anticipation. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I walked home from school, I saw it, the familiar crimson logo peeking out from the mailbox. It was thick, substantial, not a flimsy rejection letter. My heart hammered against my ribs. I just knew. I clutched the envelope like a precious artifact, my hands trembling as I walked through the front door. Mark was already home, slumped on the recliner, a beer in hand, watching a golf tournament. My mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. "Mom! Mark, it's here!" I practically shouted, holding up the envelope, my voice cracking with emotion. Mark slowly turned his head, his eyes narrowed, that familiar disdain settling over his features. He rose slowly, almost deliberately, and walked towards me. My mother, meanwhile, stopped humming, a hesitant smile forming on her face as she saw the Harvard crest. "Oh, Alara, honey, open it!" she exclaimed, a genuine flicker of excitement in her eyes. But Mark was faster. He snatched the envelope from my hand before I could even process what was happening. My heart plummeted. "Hey, give it back!" I cried, reaching for it, but he held it high above my head, a mocking grin spreading across his face. He tore it open with a flourish, pulling out the acceptance letter and a thick packet of financial aid information. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and his grin faltered, replaced by a dark scowl. "Harvard, huh? Big shot," he sneered, the words laced with a venom I'd become all too familiar with. "Do you have any idea how much this place costs? We can't afford this, Alara. We barely make ends meet as it is." My mother stepped forward, concern etched on her face. "Mark, she got a scholarship. We talked about this. She's worked so hard." Her voice was soft, conciliatory, as always. But Mark wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the acceptance letter, a storm brewing in his eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated resentment, a simmering hatred for anything that threatened his carefully constructed world where he was the undisputed king. He crumpled the letter in his fist, his knuckles white. "This is ridiculous. You think you're better than us, don't you? Running off to some fancy East Coast school, leaving us behind." His voice was low, dangerous. My mother tried again. "Mark, please." But he cut her off, his voice rising now, filled with a theatrical indignation. "No, Sarah. She needs to learn that life isn't handed to you on a silver platter. She needs to understand what it means to be grateful for what she has right here." He walked towards the kitchen sink, his back to me, and then the flick of a lighter, the smell of sulfur, and the world dissolved into smoke and ash. My college acceptance letter, my golden ticket, my father's dream, my future, all of it, gone. I stood there paralyzed, watching the last vestiges of my hope burn away. My mother said nothing. She just watched it burn too. The following days were a blur of shock and profound grief. I moved through our house like a ghost, the silence between my mother and me a chasm that grew wider with each passing hour. Mark, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened, whistling cheerfully as he grilled steaks, making casual remarks about local community colleges, as if that had been my plan all along. "Plenty of good schools right here in Arizona, Alara, eh?" he'd say, without looking at me, his tone dripping with condescension. "No need to go gallivanting across the country." My mother would nod weakly, her eyes carefully avoiding mine. I tried to talk to her, to make her understand the enormity of what Mark had done, the sheer cruelty of it. "How could you let him, Mom? How could you just stand there?" I'd whisper, my voice raw with unshed tears. She would wring her hands, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. "He was angry, Ilara. You know how he gets. It's better not to provoke him." Better not to provoke him. My future had been incinerated, and her greatest concern was not provoking the man who had done it. It was then, in that moment of profound abandonment, that something shifted inside me. The tears dried up. The grief solidified into a hard, cold knot of resolve. I was no longer a vulnerable girl. I was a survivor, and more than that, I was a force. The initial sting of humiliation transformed into a searing, unwavering determination. I would go to Harvard, and Mark would pay. Not just for the tuition, but for every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every ounce of hope he had tried to extinguish. He had stolen my dream, but he had also ignited a fire within me, a fire that would consume him. The first step was to acknowledge that I was utterly alone in this. My mother, for all her passive love, was unwilling or unable to stand up to Mark. I had to be my own champion, my own advocate. I knew the general admissions office at Harvard would have a record of my acceptance, even if the physical letter was gone. But how could I access it without my family's support, without the funds, without a place to stay? I remembered Ms. Jenkins, my guidance counselor. She had been so genuinely invested in my success. I went to her office the very next day, my face pale, my eyes still swollen from crying. I recounted everything: the burning letter, my mother's silence, Mark's smug satisfaction. Ms. Jenkins listened, her own face growing increasingly horrified. "Ilara, this is egregious," she said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "This is beyond unacceptable. We need to contact the university immediately." Together, we called Harvard. It was a long, convoluted process, but Ms. Jenkins was relentless. She explained the situation to the admissions office, emphasizing the unique circumstances of my home life. To my immense relief, they confirmed my acceptance and the full financial aid package. The physical letter was a formality. The offer stood. But even with the acceptance confirmed, the practicalities were daunting. I still needed money for travel, for dorm supplies, for books that weren't covered by financial aid. I needed a place to live for the summer before I left, as the thought of spending another moment under Mark's roof was unbearable. Ms. Jenkins, bless her heart, had an idea. Her cousin, a kind elderly woman named Eleanor who lived in Tucson, had a spare room and was looking for a house sitter for the summer. It wasn't perfect, but it was an escape. I told my mother I was spending the summer with a friend in Flagstaff, working a summer job. She barely registered it, just offered a vague nod. Mark, I imagine, was relieved to have me gone. He barely acknowledged my departure, too engrossed in a golf game on TV to even look up. I packed a single duffel bag, a handful of clothes, and my most cherished books. I left a note from my mother, a simple, "I'll be okay." It was the best I could do. In Tucson, Eleanor was a godsend. She was a retired English professor, sharp-witted and incredibly kind. I spent my days working 2 part-time jobs, one at a local bookstore, the other tutoring high school students, meticulously saving every penny. In the evenings, I devoured Eleanor's extensive library, delving deeper into literature, history, and philosophy, preparing myself for the intellectual rigor of Harvard. I also started making calls, reaching out to various legal aid societies and pro bono lawyers. I didn't know what kind of case I had, if any, but I knew what Mark had done was wrong, morally reprehensible, and possibly even illegal. I spoke to dozens of people, most of whom dismissed my claims with a polite but firm, "We don't handle family disputes of this nature." But I wasn't giving up. I was compiling everything, every dismissive comment, every snide remark, every instance of his petty tyranny. I needed proof. a paper trail, something concrete to build a case. It was during one of these calls to a legal aid clinic in Phoenix that I was put in touch with a junior lawyer named Alex Chen. He listened patiently, quietly, as I recounted the story, including the part about the burned letter. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Ilara," he said, his voice thoughtful, "what your stepfather did, while morally reprehensible, might not have a strong legal standing for direct damages regarding the letter itself. However, there might be other avenues. Have you ever considered the financial implications of his control over your mother's assets, especially those related to your late father?" My blood ran cold. My father had left a small life insurance policy, just enough to cover his funeral costs and leave a little something for my mother and me. I knew it had been depleted quickly, but I never questioned it. My mother had always handled the finances, and after Mark entered the picture, he took over that too. I realized then that Alex Chen was offering me a new direction, a path I hadn't even considered. The revenge would not just be about the letter, but about exposing the rot at the core of Mark's carefully constructed image, about unveiling the true nature of his control. I started digging, quietly, methodically. It was harder than I anticipated, given my limited access to financial documents. My mother kept all the important papers locked in a fireproof safe in her and Mark's bedroom. I couldn't just walk in and demand to see them. I had to be smart, cunning. My revenge wouldn't be loud or explosive. It would be a slow, precise dismantling. I remembered snippets of conversations, overheard hushed phone calls between Mark and his business partners, vague mentions of investments, properties, and ventures. He was a real estate agent, yes, but he always seemed to have more money than his modest salary should have allowed, even after paying the mortgage and expenses. He drove a new, expensive truck, wore designer clothes, and often took my mother on lavish weekend trips to places like Sedona and Lake Havasu. Trips I was never invited on. I started cross-referencing public records in Phoenix and Scottsdale, property deeds, tax assessments, business registrations. It was a tedious process, spending hours on county websites, cross-referencing names and addresses. And then I found it, a property deed for a vacation condo in Lake Havasu City, purchased 2 years after Marky married my mother, listed solely in his name. It wasn't a huge discovery, but it was something. It contradicted his narrative of barely making ends meet and hinted at financial maneuvering that benefited him alone. The next lead came from a more unlikely source. My grandmother, my father's mother, who lived in a quiet retirement community in Mesa. I hadn't seen her much since my father died. My mother always made excuses, saying she was too busy. I called her, telling her I was in Tucson for the summer. She was thrilled to hear from me. During our conversation, I casually brought up my father's life insurance policy. "Oh, your poor father," she sighed, her voice tinged with sadness. "He always worried about you and your mother. That policy, bless his heart, was meant to ensure you both were taken care of. I remember your mother telling me it was set up as a trust, so it couldn't be touched until you were 18, or for specific educational expenses. It was supposed to go directly to your college fund. Your father was so meticulous about that. A trust, a college fund. My father, even in death, had tried to protect me. And Mark, with my mother's silent acquiescence, had circumvented it. This was a game changer. This wasn't just about a burned letter. This was about stolen inheritance, financial fraud, and a breach of fiduciary duty. This was serious. Armed with this new information, I contacted Alex Chen again. He was intrigued. A trust, Ilara? That changes things significantly. If the life insurance was indeed set up as a trust for your education, and those funds were diverted or misused, that's a clear legal violation. We need to find the trust documents. The problem was, I had no idea where they were. My father had a small home office, but after his death, my mother had cleared it out, saying it was too painful to keep. I remembered her mentioning putting some of his important papers in a storage unit in Tempe, but I didn't know which one, or even if it still existed. This was where the plan had to become more intricate. I couldn't just waltz into Phoenix and start tearing through storage units. I needed an entry point, a reason to be back in the house without raising Mark's suspicions. And then it hit me. My 18th birthday was in August, just a few weeks before I was set to leave for Harvard. It was the perfect excuse. I called my mother, told her I'd be coming back for my birthday to celebrate with her and Mark. She sounded genuinely pleased, perhaps even relieved that I wasn't holding a grudge about the college letter. Mark, I imagined, would simply tolerate my presence for a brief celebration. I arrived back in Phoenix on a sweltering Saturday afternoon, the kind of heat that presses down on you, stealing your breath. The house felt the same, but I was different. I walked in with a newfound confidence, a steel spine that hadn't been there before. Mark gave me a curt nod from the recliner. My mother hugged me, a strained smile on her face. "Happy early birthday, honey," she murmured, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I smiled back, a polite, empty smile. The hunt was on. Over the next few days, I played the role of the dutiful, slightly subdued daughter. I helped my mother with groceries, listened patiently to Mark's boring stories about his golf game, and generally made myself as inconspicuous as possible. But my mind was racing, observing every detail. I needed to find those trust documents. I started by subtly probing my mother, asking casual questions about my father's old papers. "Mom, do you remember where Dad kept his will? Or any of his financial stuff?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honey, Mark handles all that now. It's all tucked away safely." "But where?" I just remembered something about a savings bond he mentioned for me, and I was wondering if it was still around. I pushed, feigning innocence. She hesitated. "Well, some of his old files are in that storage unit in Tempe on Rural Road, the one near the ASU campus, but most of the important stuff Mark keeps in the safe." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't like anyone touching his papers." Bingo, the storage unit and the safe. 2 targets. The storage unit was the safer bet. I remembered the address, a familiar landmark from when I used to drive past it on the way to ASU for my biotech internship. I waited for the perfect opportunity. Mark often played poker with his buddies on Friday nights, sometimes not coming home until the early hours of Saturday morning. My mother, exhausted from the week, usually fell asleep early. That Friday, I feigned a headache and went to bed early, but I set my alarm for 2 a.m. When it buzzed, I was instantly awake, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. I dressed in dark clothes, slipped my dad's old rusty toolkit into a backpack, and crept out of the house. I borrowed Mark's truck keys from the hook by the door. He wouldn't even notice until morning. The drive to Tempe was tense, the city lights sparse in the pre-dawn hours. The storage facility was dimly lit, a maze of corrugated metal doors. I knew my father's unit number. He had always been precise about such things. A small detail I'd overheard him telling my mother years ago, Unit 412. The lock was old, rusty. My father's tools, still surprisingly sharp, made short work of it. Inside, it was a dusty time capsule. Boxes filled with old art supplies, his favorite jazz records, faded photographs, and a strong, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. And there, tucked away in a sturdy metal filing cabinet, marked Financial, I found it, a thick folder, neatly labeled Elara Vance Education Trust. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was all there. The life insurance policy documents, explicitly stating that a significant portion was to be held in trust for my higher education to be released upon my enrollment in an accredited 4-year university or upon my 18th birthday, whichever came first. The documents also named my mother as the trustee, with a clear legal obligation to manage the funds responsibly for my benefit. There were bank statements, too, showing the initial deposit of the trust funds into an account, and then a series of withdrawals, large sums over the past 4 years, signed by my mother. But I recognized Mark's handwriting on some of the endorsements, his distinctive, sweeping signature. He had been forging my mother's signature, or perhaps she had signed them under duress, funneling the money into his own ventures. My blood ran cold, then hot with righteous fury. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was criminal. I meticulously photographed every page with my phone, creating a digital fortress of evidence. I carefully replaced everything, relocked the unit, and drove Mark's truck back home, my mind buzzing with the enormity of what I had found. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in hues of pink and gold as I slipped back into my room. This was it. This was the ammunition. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head and a steely resolve. I spent hours reviewing the photographs of the documents, highlighting key dates, amounts, and signatures. I cross-referenced the withdrawals with the property deeds I had found online. The timeline was damning. Large withdrawals from my trust account coincided almost perfectly with the down payment on Mark's Lake Havasu condo, and later, the purchase of a new luxury sedan he had been driving for the past 2 years. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of systematic financial manipulation and theft. I contacted Alex Chen, my pro bono lawyer, and scheduled an urgent video call. When I laid out the evidence, the trust documents, the bank statements, the property deeds, and the forged signatures, he was visibly stunned. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and serious, "this is far more significant than a burned letter. This is potential embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially fraud. We have a very strong case against Mark, and possibly even against your mother for complicity, though we'll try to avoid implicating her directly if possible." My heart ached at the mention of my mother, but a part of me also felt a grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about my education anymore. It was about justice, about exposing the man who had systematically stolen from me and manipulated her. "What's the next step?" I asked, my voice steady. Alex explained that we needed to formally petition the court, freeze Mark's assets, and subpoena his financial records. It would be a legal battle, potentially lengthy and emotionally draining, but he assured me we had a solid foundation. The challenge was going to be keeping it quiet until we had enough legal leverage to strike. I needed to return to Tucson, to Eleanor's quiet house, and continue my covert operations from a safe distance. I couldn't risk Mark finding out what I was doing. Not yet. My birthday celebration that evening felt surreal. Mark was unusually jovial, probably relieved that I hadn't made a fuss about the Harvard letter. My mother, still radiating a quiet guilt, presented me with a small, beautifully wrapped box containing a delicate silver necklace, a gift from my father from years ago, which she'd held on to. I hugged her tightly, a complex mix of love and sorrow swirling within me. I knew what I was about to do would shatter her world, but I also knew it was necessary. I left Phoenix the next morning, not looking back, a full dossier of evidence tucked securely in my backpack, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Back in Tucson, I plunged into the legal process with Alex. We filed the initial petitions, requesting an emergency injunction to freeze Mark's assets to prevent him from liquidating them once he caught wind of the lawsuit. The legal system moved slowly, excruciatingly so. But Alex was a tenacious advocate. He guided me through every step, explaining the jargon, preparing me for depositions, and outlining the potential outcomes. The first real shot across the bow came in early September, just a week after I had settled into my dorm room at Harvard. A process server delivered a summons and complaint to Mark at his real estate office in Scottsdale. I pictured his face, the smugness draining away, replaced by confusion, then fury. He would have read the documents, seen his name alongside words like embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty, and realized that his carefully constructed world was about to unravel. My mother called me, her voice shrill with panic. "Elara, what have you done? Mark is furious. He says you're trying to ruin him. He says you're suing us." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I'm not suing you. I'm trying to get back what rightfully belongs to me, what Dad intended for my education. Mark stole from me, from Dad's legacy." She began to cry. "He said if this goes public, his business will be ruined. We'll lose everything, our house, everything." Her fear was palpable, but beneath it, I could hear the echoes of Mark's manipulative words. "Mom," I said gently, "he's trying to scare you. He's trying to make you complicit." "I have proof, Mom. Proof that he took money from my trust fund to buy his condo, his truck, things that have nothing to do with us." There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by her ragged breathing. He wouldn't do that," she whispered, a desperate plea for me to say she was wrong. "He did, Mom? The documents prove it." The conversation ended with her still in tears, still seemingly unable to accept the truth of Mark's deception. The war had begun. Mark's initial strategy was to intimidate. He hired a high-powered, aggressive lawyer known for dragging out cases and burying opponents in paperwork. He sent me threatening emails and voicemails, accusing me of slander, of being an ungrateful, conniving child. I forwarded every single one to Alex. "He's trying to provoke you, Elara," Alex advised. "Don't engage. Let me handle it. Every angry outburst from him just makes him look worse in court." My mother, caught in the middle, continued to call, pleading with me to drop the lawsuit, begging me to reconsider. Her calls were tinged with a desperate hope that I would somehow make this all go away, that I would restore the illusion of her stable, happy life. It pained me to hear her so distressed, but I wouldn't back down. Not after everything. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal. Mark fought tooth and nail to avoid providing his financial records, citing privacy and business confidentiality. But Alex, with the court's backing, was relentless. He subpoenaed bank statements, property records, business ledgers, everything. Slowly, meticulously, Mark's financial house of cards began to crumble. We uncovered a pattern of shady dealings, inflated invoices, hidden assets, and a deliberate obfuscation of his true income. It became clear that not only had he embezzled from my trust fund, but he had also been defrauding the very real estate company he worked for, siphoning off funds through shell corporations and manipulating property values. The Lake Havasu condo, it turned out, was just the tip of the iceberg. He had several other undeclared investment properties, all purchased with funds that were, at least in part, derived from illicit means, including my trust. The sheer audacity of his deception was breathtaking. The climax of the discovery process came during Mark's deposition. He sat across from Alex and me, his face tight with controlled rage, but he couldn't hide the beads of sweat on his forehead. He tried to deny everything, to explain away the discrepancies, to paint me as a disgruntled, vengeful stepdaughter. But Alex systematically dismantled his lies, presenting irrefutable documentary evidence. His forged signatures, the clear paper trail of money moving from my trust account to his personal and business accounts, the dates aligning perfectly with his asset purchases. When Alex presented the photograph of my burned acceptance letter, Mark visibly flinched, his composure finally cracking. "This is irrelevant," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "This has nothing to do with her ridiculous claims." "Oh, it's very relevant, Mr. Thorne," Alex said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "It illustrates a pattern of malicious intent, a deliberate attempt to thwart Miss Vance's future and control her life, which aligns perfectly with your actions in diverting her inheritance." Mark's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled it. The entire deposition was a masterclass in methodical, unwavering legal pressure. I sat there, quietly observing, feeling a cold satisfaction seep through me. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about watching a bully face the consequences of his actions, stripped bare of his arrogance and lies. The news of the lawsuit, once under wraps, began to leak out. Mark's colleagues and clients, hearing whispers of fraud and embezzlement, started to distance themselves. His business, once thriving on his smooth talk and connections, began to dry up. The real estate firm, fearing a public scandal and potential legal ramifications, quietly terminated his employment. He tried to sell the Lake Havasu condo, but our injunction prevented him from doing so. The financial squeeze was immense. His carefully constructed facade of success and respectability was crumbling, brick by agonizing brick. My mother, finally confronted with the undeniable proof of Mark's deceit and facing the very real possibility of losing their home due to his mounting legal fees and dwindling income, had a breaking point. She called me, not to plead, but to confess. Her voice was thin, broken. He made me sign things, Alara, she whispered, her words punctuated by sobs. He told me it was just for tax purposes, for investments. He said it was for our future, for security. He said if I didn't, we'd lose everything, just like after your father died. She admitted to knowing, deep down, that something was wrong, but she had been too afraid, too dependent, too vulnerable to challenge him. She begged me for forgiveness. My heart ached for her, for the woman who had been so easily manipulated, so utterly consumed by fear. But a part of me also felt a lingering resentment for her passivity, her unwillingness to protect me. Mom, I said, my voice gentle but firm, you need to cooperate with Alex. Tell him everything. It's the only way to protect yourself now. The ultimate payoff, the moment of sweet, chilling revenge, came not in a courtroom drama, but in a series of meticulously executed legal maneuvers. Facing overwhelming evidence and the very real threat of criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, Mark's lawyer advised him to settle. He had no other choice. The settlement was comprehensive, every penny of my original trust fund, with interest, plus substantial damages for emotional distress and punitive damages. He was also required to pay all legal fees. To do this, he had to sell all of his undeclared investment properties, including the Lake Havasu condo. He lost his truck, his fancy clothes, his illusion of wealth. He was left with nothing but the house he shared with my mother, now burdened with the shame of his public downfall and a mountain of debt. The court also issued a restraining order, preventing him from contacting me directly or indirectly. The final act of my revenge, the most satisfying, occurred on a cold November morning. I had just finished my first semester at Harvard, a semester of intense study, intellectual stimulation, and a growing sense of belonging. The world of academia had become my sanctuary, a stark contrast to the turbulent world I had left behind. Alex had sent me the final settlement check, a substantial sum that would secure my future for years to come. I didn't need it all for tuition. My financial aid was still robust, but it was proof, tangible proof, of my victory. I took a portion of that money, went to a high-end stationery store in Cambridge, and purchased the most exquisite, heavy cream-colored cardstock I could find. I wrote a single elegant bill, for services rendered, 1 Harvard University education with interest. Total due, the exact amount of the settlement calculated to the last cent. I signed it Alara Vance, my new name, forged in fire and tempered by resolve. I enclosed it in a thick envelope, emblazoned with a discreet, embossed crimson seal I had specially ordered. I paid for overnight delivery, ensuring it would arrive on a specific day. I knew the postal routes in Phoenix. It would land in his mailbox on a Tuesday, the same day nearly 4 years to the day that he had burned my acceptance letter. I imagined him opening it, his face paling as he recognized the heavy cardstock, the crimson seal, the chilling precision of the amount. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the message. It was about sending him the bill for a future he tried to steal, a future I had built despite him. It was about reminding him that even though he had burned the letter, he could never burn the dream. And as for my mother, she eventually left Mark. The weight of his deception, his cruelty, and the financial ruin he brought upon them finally became too much. She moved into a small apartment in a quieter part of Phoenix, slowly rebuilding her life, finding a strength I never knew she possessed. We talk now, tentatively, healing the wounds of her silence. But some scars run deep. I often wonder if he still remembers that smell, the acrid scent of burning paper, a ghostly reminder of the day he thought he extinguished a dream, only to ignite an unquenchable fire. The end.